Well, good morning to everybody. And I must say, a very warm welcome to grade 11 students that have joined us in the special session today. I can see we have Tino with us. Welcome, Tino. My name is Mr. A.F. Gabriel, and I am going to be the facilitator and the teacher for the next 12 Saturdays in this very special national tutorial campaign that is brought to you by Africa Teen Geeks together with the Department of Education. And of course, on this first slide, you can see also various sponsors who have made this program possible. I want to just say it's this first session, we're still probably waiting for the news and the word to get out into all the schools. So we're hoping to have a lot more grade 11 students joining us from next week onwards. So Tino, please tell all the friends that you know, all the students that you have in your class. Maybe you might know students in other schools and things like that. Help us to spread the word. It is a free initiative, so we want the students in our country to really take the opportunity to have this. I am a professionally trained information technology teacher. I teach grade 10, 11, and 12 information technology, and I am from Durban. Okay, so let's begin with today. You can also be reminded that these sessions are recorded and they are uploaded as well. So all the slides that you see, you don't have to attempt to memorize anything or make too much of notes, because you can actually access the recording in case you have forgotten anything. And again, even when other people join up, we can let them know that even if they've missed a session or two, they can always watch the recording in order to catch up. Okay, so let's get on with the lesson for today. Just a few things. During the course of the session, I prefer not to be interrupted. If you have a question, I will have a special session of questions. Look, at the end, we'll have at least 5 to 10 minutes to spare, if in case you have any questions. But I know IT grade 11 can be a bit challenging, and we don't want you to be lost along the way in the lesson. So at any point when you feel you're not sure about something, hold the question, because when I'm finished with that particular aspect or that idea, I will then open up the floor for questions. And just note your question. Maybe if you have a little page or pen in front of you, you can make a note of your question. So let us begin. Before I start, okay, let me just tell you what we're going to be doing at this point in time. We're going to start with string manipulation, and the first few sessions in the courses is going to just simply kind of help to put your important skills together. Remember, we have only 12 sessions, so we can't focus on the whole syllabus, but I am going to focus on areas that I know are extremely common and popular for testing in the November exams that you will be coming up at the end of this year. And at the same time, I'm also quite aware of some of the important basic concepts that you do in grade 11 that becomes very, very important for grade 12. So I'm going to be focusing on those in this course over the next 12 sessions. And of course, string manipulation is, of course, one of those things. You'll find that a question will be dedicated to it on its own, or it should be, at the end of this year. And it forms a massive part of the testing when you actually end up in grade 12. I would say string manipulation is at least 30% of what that paper would be when you get to grade 12. So let's get into string manipulation grade 11. Okay, now firstly, we first need to look at the data types, or some people say data, right? But I kind of say data. So data types that work with strings. I'm sure you've already worked with integers and real numbers, which was mostly what you would have used in grade 10. But when we introduce you to string data types, you'll find that obviously in Delphi, and remember our programming language is Delphi, in Delphi we use the data type called string. So when you're making variables, you will say of the type string. When we're done with this presentation, we will go into Delphi itself, and we will actually have a little practical session where we will make use of these things. The other data type is a character, and a character is a single one character. A string is what they call it a string because it comes from the expression a string of characters. So a character is a single thing, like for example, a single letter, like the letter A, or an apostrophe, or the number 7. Each of those things is a single character, but when you put them together, you got a string. I hope you remember, your teacher might have taught you the maximum size for a string is 256 characters. Okay, to remind you also, the chat facility in Zoom, you can use the chat facility if you would like to. Sometimes I will answer a question, sorry, I will ask a question during the session, and it wastes time sometimes to unmute your speaker for you to answer. So sometimes you can just answer at the chat, which gives me an idea that you're kind of following what I'm saying and that you're comfortable with what I'm teaching. So I know whether to move slow or to move fast. So that's the character. So a string, 256 characters maximum size. Right. Okay. And then we have a text file. Now the text file, I don't know if you've started it in your schools. We know also due to the pandemic, lots of different schools are at different places. Some students are not even going to school every day. So we are quite aware that maybe you might not have gotten to certain parts of the syllabus as yet. So a text file is also part of string handling because we store text in a file system. And of course, that's much more complicated than just working with strings on its own. I hope to tackle text files towards the middle of this session as well. Okay, now, first, before we manipulate strings, we have to understand how a string is stored in the memory of the computer. So let's answer that question. A string is stored like an array. Now, you would have studied arrays at least in the first half of your year. And an array, if you will remember, is a special data structure which gives you little compartments called cells to store multiple values. And so if you didn't know, that's how a string is kept. Each letter has its own cell, just like how each number in the array has its own storage cell. And it's called an index. It's called an index as in an array. Some textbooks and some terminology uses the word subscript, but Delphi itself uses index for error reporting. So index or subscript is the same thing. Now, let's take, for example, we wanted to store the name Bilbo. It would get stored like this. You could see each compartment for a letter. Can you see B-I-L-B-O? And internally, you don't see all this. It's done by the processor in the RAM itself, and it stores the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And those are your index numbers, your subscripts, right? We'll call them index. So index 1 is where B is stored, 2 is for the letter I, and so on and so on. Now, I know you're also quite used to the idea by the time in grade 11, knowing that whilst humans, we prefer to count from 1, computers always count from 0. We are always having to remind students, and they always forget and find it a little bit confusing, that when we have structures and we extract numbers from structures, the computer always numbers the first thing from 0. If you've used a combo box, or if you have used a list box, you would have seen this. When you try to capture what the user has chosen out of a combo box, if he selected the first thing, it's 1 to you and I, but the computer would number that as choice number 0. But with a string, one has to remember that the computer actually uses 0 to store the length of the string. So the computer also knows that Bilbo is 5 characters long. Remember, the maximum size is 256. We haven't used all 256 of the string size. We've only used 5 characters. And so the computer keeps track of how much you have used in its 0 cell, which is accessible to us, but not in the ordinary way. And then the letters are numbered from 1. So that's where it is. So it's still counting from 0, but it's using 0 for some other storage. And our numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is actually quite useful for us, because now if somebody asks another human, hey, what's the first letter in Bilbo? They would say B. And in the index, if you see the index number here, it's 1, which is the first thing, which makes it easier to work with strings. Okay, now we can access these numbers as programmers. So if I want to know what the third letter is, and it's L, I can actually do that with programming code, and we are going to do that today as well. Okay, so before we go into coding again, note also that I want to give you some simple strings that you'll find you will always generally end up using. And again, we will use some of what's on this slide today. Let's say you put the word program. The first thing I want you to see in the slide is that single open quotes are used to indicate a string. So that's Delphi syntax. Now remember, syntax is grammar. It's like language. Just like how English, you have to put a full stop at the end of a sentence, and your teacher will shout out if you don't start with a capital letter, and she'll say your words don't make sense. Same with Delphi. You're trying to communicate with the computer, and so if you use the wrong symbols, grammar, syntax is what it's called in IT language, then your computer will not understand the instruction, and you'll get some errors in your program. You'll have to fix them. So single apostrophes are used to store strings in Delphi, and you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, to the processor, the meaning of program in quotes is the word program. But look at how, if you type "he's a genius," now remember, the apostrophe, as much as we're using it as a quote, is also part of the English language, and we use it for joining two words. Like, for example, "he is" in English is joined with an apostrophe between the E and the S, which means we say "he's," but we are meaning "he is." Now, how do you do the apostrophe when that apostrophe symbol is used as a close quote? If you just put an apostrophe there, wanting to use it an apostrophe, Delphi will assume that you are closing the string or opening the string. So what Delphi does is, that's where you use two of them, a double apostrophe. If you hit the button twice, and as you can see on the representation on the left-hand side, it will know that you are not using that as a end or open quote for the string, but that you actually want to access or use the apostrophe symbol in English. So now you'll see that translate to "he's a genius," and it will put the apostrophe there when it does the display. So if you need to use a display an apostrophe as part of your string, you put a double apostrophe in your quote. Okay, now two things I want to get very clear. I find my grade 11 students always confusing these things. Right? At the bottom, you'll see two things, open, close, and it looks the same, open, close, but you'll see that the second one has a space. Now, the space is not nothing. That's the funny thing. It looks like nothing, and if you try to display a space, you actually won't see anything. So you can display a space, but the person looking at your interface will see that they won't see anything there. But in actual fact, a space is something. Now, we must remember that, because the computer will count it. You might not be able to see it, but if you ask the computer how many characters are there, it will say 1, because it'll count the space, even though you can't see it. However, the third line of this slide is the open close quote. It's opened and then closed immediately without pressing anything on the keyboard. And we refer to that as the null string. That is actually nothing. That is the empty string. We use it for initializing, and again, I'm going to demonstrate that in the program today. So we need to understand the null string as a grade 11 student, as opposed to the space. Okay, now let me quickly introduce you to some operators that we use in string functions. We use plus. Now, plus, to mathematics, when you're working with numbers, plus means addition. You can still use a plus sign when you're working with strings, but it doesn't mean addition. It actually means to join. Now, they got a big word there in the table, right? This is from a textbook. It says concatenate. So don't worry about that word if you've never heard it before. It means the same as join. So what the plus sign does with strings is that it just takes two strings and it puts them next to each other. In this way, we can use plus signs to add bits and pieces of string things in between strings. So look at the example on the right hand side. You got a string variable, its name is s full name, and then you're saying it's assigned the value s name, which is another variable. Then we're saying plus, and then can you see we are adding, and that's not null. Can you see clearly there's a space there in between the two codes? And then we're adding surname. So what is this doing? It's actually putting a space between two separate variables called name and surname and putting it together as one string and putting it into a variable called full name. So you've got the full name, but you've got a space in between it. Can you see? And we've done it with the plus. So it's not quite, sorry, what am I trying to say? It's not quite adding like maths, but it's joining things up together. Right, then if you look at the equal to sign, you can actually compare two strings to see if one is equal to the other. And the computer does the comparing. You don't have to compare each letter, the first letter to the first letter of the next name. It does that all by itself. But, very important, note this. This comparison is case sensitive, which means that if one name has a capital letter and it is not a capital letter in the second name, the computer would not see those as the same. There are functions that you can use to actually get the computer to ignore that if you wanted to, right? But ordinarily, when you compare two things to the computer, a capital D is a different thing from a small letter d, for example. So you've got to be very careful that when you're comparing strings, they also have to be in the same case. Remember, we use computer terminology, uppercase or upcase to mean capital letters and lowercase to mean small letters. Okay, I don't want to waste too much time on the slide as well. You are in grade 11 and you would have seen all these operators before. A greater than and a less than sign facing each other is usually read as not equal to. So you're checking if something is not equal to something else. The less than and the greater than mean the same thing with strings as it does with numbers, whether one is greater than the other. How does the computer compare strings? It doesn't make sense. Like, hey, is cat greater than dog? What does that mean? Well, the computer simply compares the letters, and it uses alphabetical order in which to do that. So if you got a word that's like cat, and then you got another word that's dog, dog would be considered greater than cat because dog starts with D, which is the fourth letter of the alphabet. Cat starts with C, which is the third letter of the alphabet. So it would assume then that cat is less than, or dog is greater than cat. So that's how it compares using alphabetical order. So that's pretty cool because you can use the greater than sign or the less than sign to actually arrange strings in alphabetical order in the same way that we can arrange numbers from ascending or descending order. And I'm sure you've done that in grade 10 as well. Okay, sorry. And then, of course, there's the greater than equal to and the less than equal to if you want to include both the variables in the comparison. Okay, and of course, I want to show you one more. I want to tell you one more thing. We'll be using two things, functions and procedures, during the course of our coding with Delphi and string manipulation, and some instructions that are preset for us by Delphi in the Delphi programming language will be functions, and the other things are procedures. And so far, we need to understand the difference. Students very often confuse the difference between functions and procedures, and we don't use the instructions correctly, and that's why we end up with lots of errors. So I want to also clear that up. Let me just show you some slides that will just give you, it's more than what this slide is showing, but of course we don't want to do too much of theory and waste time. So I'm just going to give you a basic information, and if you have any more, if you need to know any more, you can ask at the end of the session. Okay, the main thing to remember is that functions have a return value. Functions return something to us. So it's like you're asking a question and Delphi will respond with the answer. We call that answer a result. Okay, again, you will see this in the practical sense later. Procedures, of course, they complete a set of instructions, but they have no return result. They don't give you an answer or a result, but they can make changes to things, and they can alter things, and you can run instructions that will make changes to your variables and things like that, but it doesn't have a result. The important thing to note is that when you decide whether you want to use a function or a procedure, you have to remember that with a function, because it's giving you a result, you have to do something with the result. You cannot just use the function without either displaying its result, or you can use the result. You can store the result in a variable if you like, or you can even use the result in combination with other instructions like loops and things like that. Interestingly enough, again, in today's session, I hope to demonstrate these things as well. Okay, so that's the main thing. And with the procedure, you simply just call the procedure. It doesn't have to display. In fact, if you attempt to display a procedure, you will get an error there because it doesn't give you a result. Okay, so two main problems that we find grade 11 students as well as grade 12s confused when it comes to functions and procedures. Okay, the last thing that I want to show you before we go in, this is the final slide. I'm sure you must be excited to just go into Delphi and write some code, is some string functions that we will use. We're going to use some string functions and some string procedures. It's only a 45-minute session, so we won't have time to go into procedures today. So I'm going to focus on the functions, and we'll do some procedure. We'll do some procedures in the next session. This page is a series, and I put this in the slide so that you can have it for yourself. And when you are working with it, use this page, and you will find that you'll be able to use the function correctly. The trim method, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time on trim. It's a very basic function, and all it does is that it removes extra spaces at the beginning and the end of any string. So that's very useful. You'll find sometimes when users get information, they'll press the space bar a couple of times. And remember, you will not be able to see the space when it displays. Like if you look at that screen, you'll see the word books has a couple of spaces before it and a couple of spaces after it, but it doesn't display with the quotes. So without the quotes, if you just see the word books there, you won't know how many spaces there are before and after, and that might spoil things. Like, for example, if you ask how many letters in the word books, it's not going to say 5 because it's going to count those spaces as well. And that obviously can create havoc with our programming. So the trim is pretty useful. It will chop out any additional spaces. In fact, standard practice in real programming is to always use the trim function on user input. We just generally don't trust users to give us the correct values and things. So the trim function is just always used whenever a string is captured from the user. Okay, the length function is going to be the focus of our lesson today. If you've used it, you'll find that what it does is it accesses that first cell that I told you about, and it will tell us how many letters there are in the string, in the whatever the string variable is. So here's how the length function works, right? You use the word length, L-E-N-G-T-H, and in a round bracket, you place the string variable that you want to count, how many letters there are in it, and it will give you that. Now notice, although the word, the string function is being applied on a string, its result is an integer, a number, because it's actually telling us how many characters. I won't say letters, because even if there are other things like numbers and commas, it will count all of those things as well. So it counts the characters and it returns it to you. So I want you to see this third column. It says return. You will see when I show you a slide next week with procedures, and we'll compare them again next week. There is no column for return because procedures don't return. So the length actually gives you back an answer to your question. How long is this word? In this example, the word school, if you count SCHOOL, 6 characters. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the return function is 6. Okay, I want you to look at the copy function. I don't want to talk about it today because we won't use it in today's lesson. We will definitely use it in next week's lesson. But I've got the slide here, and you can actually help me and yourself by at least at some point in the week going through the syntax of it to see how it works. And And then we'll look into it next week. You'll see the copy function has lots of ways that which it can be used. Students are also not very aware of this copy version of the function, which has only two parameters in its call statement. But we'll talk about that next week. Okay, so the focus today is on the length function. I put the slide in because I wanted to highlight the length function, but I actually already did it while the previous slide was on, so we don't need to run the slide. So that is the end of the slide presentation of the session for today. And so let's go into our Delphi programming language, and let's have a look at working with any of these functions. Okay, now before I do that, at this point, I'm going to ask if Tito, especially if there's anything you would like to know. I'm just going to pause for a second if you have a question. Okay, sorry, Tino, yeah. So I take it you okay so far? Okay, no problem. Thank you for responding in the chat. Let's move on to the code then. Okay, now if you look at this particular screen, you'll find this is your Delphi interface, and you've got your panels and your object inspector on the left-hand side, your project window on the right-hand side, the tool palette at the bottom, and of course this big window at the center for my interface. I'm in the design view at the moment, and I am just going to take you quickly through what string work we're going to do with this interface. I know that perhaps if you're a good student, you might find that this is easy stuff for you, but I'm quite aware that there are so many students, especially if this recording becomes available to many people, they struggle with some basic concepts in string handling. So it's the first lesson, and I wanted to start with some basics first. And as we move on in the sessions, I need to pick up the pace and really get going with some of the challenging aspects in the grade 11 syllabus. But let's get through some basic aspects of string. Okay, first we're going to just demonstrate how the length function works, right? So we're going to enter a word here in this part of the interface. When the user presses the length function, the length of the word should be displayed here. Then we're going to show you how to demonstrate using the string as an array, and we can access a single letter of the function, of the word. Then we're going to play with the addition to show you how the plus, which we just saw, will be able to add and join things, and we'll add spaces to our word. And then, of course, we will do something a little more interesting. We'll actually take the user's word and display it in reverse. Okay. The fifth button you'll see is a button called palindrome. Again, because of time, I'm not sure we'll get as far as palindrome. So we'll hold that for now, and we'll just close up with that next week. But if there is time, we'll finish that up. Okay, so let's run the interface by pressing the play button. Okay. And it should run without any errors, and that's our interface that the user will see. There's no functionality in the buttons at the moment. Okay, I also going to take this opportunity to help you to show you how exams are laid out and what is expected of you. When you write an exam, this is exactly how the test will appear. They'll give you a working interface. Everything is done for you. Don't design interfaces in the test. The buttons are all there, but there is no functionality. And then you'll take the paper or the questions and you'll simply answer the questions. Okay, this is my interface, so it doesn't go together with an exam questions, but it's basic, so I'm going to go through the instructions one by one. So we're going to look at this first button, and we're going to code an instruction that simply uses the length function to find out how long the word is. To do that, whenever we want to code instructions for a button, we double click on the button on the form. Okay, and let's do that for the length function. And you'll see it'll now take us into the code where we will have to write code. Now, the examiners, especially for tests and exams, what they generally do is all the button procedures are also written up in there. You'll see, just scrolling through, you'll see 1, 2, they usually appear in order in the exam. Sometimes Delphi creates them in its own order, but there's 1, 2, there's the third one, there's the fourth one, and of course, this is the palindrome one. So all the 5 buttons are there. but they usually come with this. The examiner will usually put a little comment to remind you again that when you put 2 forward slashes together, anything you type on the line after those slashes is ignored by the compiler. It simply assumes that it's notations or comments that are used for programmers to communicate with each other. It's not for instructions. So is entered here number 1, enter your code here. So you know now that you are working in number 1. I'm doing this because, again, very often we have students whose code for number 1 is somewhere else in some other button. And then we have to, then you're going to get it wrong because this is not doing the right thing. And then we have to figure out, oh, but that code is supposed to be for here. So try not to, the exam is quite clear. The numbers will be all in the questions like this in a comment. So you know you're in the right place. So if you look at your design review, we are now at button number 1. When we double click on it, it takes us into the code for button number 1. I generally tell students to leave that there and press the enter because it also helps us examiners to find all the numbers easily. If you delete it, then we don't know which is number 1 after that. We have to look closely at the code and the names and so on. So leave it there. We know it is number 1 and we're going to enter code. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to switch to undocked view so I can actually maximize the screen, and it's easier to display code because we can have it on the full screen like this. Without the tool palette on the right hand side. Okay, now we know that we are going to have to create a variable. So, and I'm coding with you so you can see exactly how everything goes. And we're going to make a variable. Now, standard naming practice is we always make a string variable, with the letter S. We start with S meaning string, and then we give our name. So we're going to call it word because we're going to ask the user to enter a word. So we got a crazy fellow. Right, we got a string variable created. Now we need to capture this word from the T-edit. Okay, so if we go back to our design, you will see that there is a T-edit here, and he's going to enter the word here. We have to capture it off that T-edit. So let's go back to our code. Okay, so that is the T-edit. So we just created the variable, and we're going to say S word is assign the value, and the 3-letter prefix that is used to name a T-edit, the examiners will use EDT. And when you type in EDT and you press the control spacebar, it'll give you a list of anything in your program that actually starts with EDT, even if it's not components, even variables will pick up in this list. So you must also be aware of what your variables are. We won't generally name variables with EDT. We use that word for T-edits so we don't get confused. Right, and that T-edit is called EDT word. And so we'll say EDT word dot, and we will capture the text from the word. How do we do that? We simply use text, pick it up off the list, semicolon, right? How do we know that the name of this one is EDT word? If you have forgotten, you can highlight it. Obviously, I've moved my object inspector. If I go back to default layout, you will find that when you highlight any component and you look in the object inspector on the left, right at the top, you'll see the name of the component, EDT word. You don't have to scroll down to name to find it. Obviously, you named it there. You can go here to change its name if you want to. But at the top, the name of the component will appear. So that is the component, the correct component that we are using. Let's go back to Classic Undocked and let's go back to our code. Okay, and now we've got the word. Now we simply want to find out how long this word is. Remember that this length function returns an integer. How long the word is counts how many letters. That's a number. It's not going to be a fraction. There can't be 2.5 letters in a word. So we know that it's going to be an integer. We will name all our integer variables, starting with the letter I, and maybe we want to say I number of letters, right? And we will say of the type integer. Oops. And now you've made yourself an integer variable. And then you can say in control spacebar. Now you might have wondered, oh, are you making such long variable names? Because of the control spacebar shortcut, it's quite comfortable to make names that are useful. See, I know when I see that variable I num letters, I know what it means, the number of letters for the word. If I put INL, I open this program next week, I look at it, INL, NFL, what is that? What is it meaning? We can't remember. So sometimes you might say, oh, it's really irritating, it's such a long variable name. But with the control spacebar, it's no real problem because you can just type in the first few letters and pick it up off a list. You don't never have to type the whole variable name, right? Now we will use the length function. We'll say I number of letters, which is going to store how many letters there are in the string. And then we're going to say S word. And now it tells us how many characters there are. No errors in our code. And then we have to display that on the next TEdit. And that is this one here, which is called EDT word length. That's where it's going to display the result. So then our EDT will be on the left-hand side now, because we're going to display to it. So you can hear it's on the right because we are taking out of the TEdit, putting into a variable. Now we're going to take the TEdit, which is text, and we're going to display the number of letters. Now, if I say I in use control spacebar, needs a bit more for the shortcut, number of letters, we're going to have a small problem. What's the problem? Okay. The problem is that number of letters is a string, but text TEdits can only display characters, strings, letters. So we will have to add a conversion here because that's an integer. And I know you did all this in grade 10. So let's say I number of letters, close the bracket. And now it should display, convert the number of letters, which is an integer, to a string and put that string onto the TEdit. It's always a good practice to save your programs before you run them. Press the play button. Everything looks good to go. No errors. Let's type in a word. Let's type in the word hello. And hello has 5 letters there. Let's click on the length function and you'll see that it puts in the correct thing, neat in the display 5. Let's go back and put hello and 2 spaces and press the length function. Now, can you see what I said was interesting about the trim function? When you look at that word hello, it just looks like the word hello. If you ask anybody, hey, how many letters are there in that TEdit? They're going to say 5. But when you press your length function, it tells you 7. The reason for that is because I pressed some extra spaces when I was typing in the word. Users always make mistakes like that. So it's pretty useful to use the trim function on hello or in any input, so that even if because if you don't want the spaces, then that will sort itself out. Okay, very quickly, I want to go to the next button because we are running out of time. I got just a few more minutes and I want to leave some minutes for questions. If there's no questions, then I'll probably just carry on. Okay, so we've done with that button, right? We got the length that's working. Let's go to this button. I've already pre-created the variables that we're going to need for it. Already did the captioning as well to save us some time. So we're going to capture the word, but this time we're going to get the user to pick from the which letter he wants us to display. And to do that, we will use a variable called iLetter, and we will say he wants which letter, and we'll use an input box. So I wanted to do this part to demonstrate the use of an input box. This is a preset dialog box, which we use for the user to enter or communicate with the user when there's no space on the interface or the GUI for capturing it, because maybe he won't even use this option. So it only displays the box when you need it. The input box has 3 things. The first one is the name of the box. And we'll call it, maybe we'll say capture. Let's call the box capture letter. And we've got capture letter. You can leave it blank if you like, and then it just won't title the box. And then we'll put an instruction. Please, my spelling is bad. Enter, let's just make that bigger so you can see position. we mean the position of the letter that he wants to see, right? This one, we'll just leave it open and close, put the null string in that one all the time, right? No time to explain that right now. Okay, so we got that. We've captured that. Now remember, the input box, again, is a string box, so we'll have to convert it to an integer to store it into an integer variable. So now we're going to go the other way around. Before we did int to string, now we're going to go string to int, and then we have captured that particular value. Now, what is the name of the tedit that displays the result? That's going to go into this tedit when the letter goes there, and it is called, well, edt one letter. We didn't even need to check there because it's obvious. Edt, here it is, one letter dot text. Okay, assign the value. Now we want to display the letter in the position that the user. So if he says 3, he wants to see the third letter in our word. So we'll say display S word. And this is how that is done. It's done in a square bracket. You can access the index number by putting whatever you want in a square bracket. And you close the bracket. Now that's telling the computer, you can put a specific number there and then it will display that particular number for you. But otherwise, whatever letter the user gives, it will use that variable and try to find that letter inside the word. So now we are not using the letter of the word itself. We are using the index you saw in the slide, that number you saw in the slide. Let's save this. Let's test run this. This might be the last button that we have time to code for today. Okay, so let's enter the same word, hello. Let's click our length function, that's working fine. Now let's see what happens when we click one letter. I click, and can you see that it opens up this input box, right? Input box will carry at least 2 marks if you use it correctly in grade 11, and then by the time you get to grade 12, it will carry 1 mark for use correctly in the exam. You'll see that it's putting our heading there, capture letter, it took that from us. This is our instruction, which we typed, please enter position. And so we'll enter the 3. Now that means he wants to see the letter L, that's in the 3rd position. So we click OK, and you can see that it displays the correct letter L. If I click it again, and I say 5, and I click OK, it's now displaying the O, because the O is the 5th letter in the word. And it's using the same number because it's numbered. You saw that slide, it's numbered from 1. Okay, so what we have done so far is some very basic string handling in which we've used the length function. We saw how we can use the array. Now, if you'll remember also, this is from your first term knowledge, how an array works. We always use the syntax of a square bracket for an array. That is why, because a string works like an array, we use the same syntax when we are trying to access a particular part of a huge or bigger string. Our program is saved. And I think we've more or less come to the end of the time. We usually like to leave a few minutes at the end for any questions that you might want to ask. So I'm going to stop there for now. And Tino, I'm going to ask you how you felt so far. You think you've followed everything? Are you happy? And do you have any question? In fact, I'm going to actually ask to have you unmuted. Perhaps you'd like to say something. I don't know you at all, so I'm not sure whether you're what level are you at, whether you are very comfortable, whether you're a good student, whether you're getting A's or B's, or if you're like struggling a little bit and you need a bit of extra help. That might help me to see where I can assist you with. Tino, yes, you're asking me what Delphi is used mostly for. Are you a student of IT?
I don't IT at school, but it's something I want to learn.
Oh, okay. So you probably found everything very confusing today.
Yeah, no, I started with Python before, so Delphine is new to me.
Oh, so you have some programming skills.
Yeah, like I do understand like the integers and the indexes and stuff like that.
Yes, Python does have all of that. Yeah. Did you join the grade 10 session?
No.
Oh, no, it's happening at the same time. What made you join the grade 11?
Well, at school I'm in grade 11.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, well, it
Yeah,
was
but
good to have you. Yes, Delphi is a programming language, just like Python. It's used to create applications. If you look at the screen again, and I'll just quickly try and bring up the interface. You'll see that what we have done here now is we've actually created an application for a user to use, and it can be sit or running on a computer. We write applications for companies. We can write for libraries, for businesses, people running their businesses, for a secretary. Obviously, very complicated apps. But yeah, we generally use Delphi to write desktop applications. Python and Java are other languages that are pretty good for um, mobile applications, like for cell phones and tablets. Delphi is not a good language to use if you want to write applications for those devices, for things like Android and so on. But yeah, that's mainly the purpose that we have for Delphi.
yeah, but I'll do more research about it so that next time I can understand more.
Do you have IT students at your school?
Yeah.
Okay, well then give this link to your friends, because I think they will benefit from being part of this, especially if they, you know, with the pandemic, have lost a lot of time. Teachers may be rushing, so these sessions might be very helpful to any of your other friends in school doing IT, and also let your even in other schools, just get the word out for us, because we're offering this as a free service to students, and we want them all to make good use of it.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. All right, is there anything else you want to know? Because it's more or less the time to end the session. Anything else I can help you with before I sign out?
I think I'm fine for now. I'll
Okay.
go do more research on my own.
Okay, no, wonderful. It's good to have you. It's nice to know that there are people like you out there, that even though you are in grade 11 and you have your whole lot of stuff to do with your own subjects, that you actually have the time to get into other programming stuff that's probably not even required for school. So yeah, I'm quite thrilled to meet you, Tino, and people. It's we teachers get very encouraged when we hear students that actually spend their own time doing things like learning code rather than gaming or doing all sorts of other things that just waste time. I mean, not that those things are bad, but yeah, no, it's pretty cool. All right, Tino, well done. Have a good day. Have a good week. Remember to help us get the word out for the program. And I hope to see you and a hell of a lot more of your friends next week when we launch again. Same time, same place.
Thank you.
Okay, students, with that, I would like to say all the best with your studies as we proceed with the program. And I know maybe more of you will join next week. I hope you've actually had a go at this particular interface, which we'll continue with it, and we're going to write a little bit more code for it next week. But I hope you watched the video so you've caught up to where we are, and we'll see you in a week's time. Tune in once again on this channel at the comfort of your own home for this free session brought to you by Africa Teen Geeks and the tuition campaign to help all 10, 11, 12 students, not just with IT, but sessions are running for mathematics, physics, and also life science. So when you listen to this recording, please make sure that you really do get the word out so that all the students in schools can make good use of this special programming. With that, I want to say have a wonderful day and thank you for listening today. Goodbye.